Hi, Silver Rain Runningcloud here with the story of Silver Rain Runningcloud. As usual, not happy with my light situation in here. Not happy with that reflection there. Not happy with the darkness on my face. And I don't know what it's going to be like until I actually, start the broadcast. So excuse me for trying to make things a little better. Oh, that's over here. Oh, maybe if I turn this light on. Well, it's kind of worse, but we'll just pretend it's good enough. All right. Wow, now I'm embarrassed because the lights are terrible. I see all these shadows on my face and they're from the disease, because my teeth are really hurting today. I had to finally admit to myself that Star Trek's not going to be coming for me this week. And I can't continue this lifestyle. There are a lot of criminals living here that want to get back to business, and they don't really like having me here, and I don't belong here. It's not a place that I've trained for or was expecting to be in, and I actually just don't have the social skills for this environment. Plus, living in one room is difficult, you see. Now, I call this ignored to death because that's how I am. It seems to me the story of what's happened to me, from the Ivy League faculty plagiarism involving the Ford Foundation, Harvard and Yale, UCLA, Swarthmore, Columbia, it seems to me that would be an extremely important story for Americans to know. I mean, as your children and yourselves go off to college, don't you think it's important to know the moral character of your professors? And if you've got professors that actually have organized a plagiarism ring, don't you think you should know that? Don't you think that somebody should let you in on it so that you can protect yourself? Well, I think you should. I think you have the right to protect yourself from corruption in academia. That's what I believe. Then, when you find out that Sheldon L. Epstein actually sabotaged my ability to become a corporate lawyer, and by stealing my information and creating false complaints against himself in my name, saying that I accused him of being a racist, and then using racism, he just totally made it impossible for me to go to law school. I couldn't even get a job for 2 years after graduation because I was blacklisted. But because of all the confidentiality laws and the non-disclosure agreement for 30 years that I had signed with Brunswick, I couldn't even look into the matter. I had no way to defend myself. And Sheldon pretended to have had a mental breakdown while he moved into the faculty of Northwestern University Technological School so he could continue to steal information to patent from Northwestern University students the way that he had done me. Now, don't you think that would be something important for American students to know? Don't you think, as all the young potential future engineers, computer scientists, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, don't you think they would want to know that the university administration under Levine and Shapiro actually endorsed the presence of a plagiarizing predator that was patenting ideas that belonged to other people using all of his skills? Now, if they told the story about me, a lot of victims would never have been victimized, right? But they didn't. So then that culture is left alive. So when I get to Yale, the Europeans don't like the fact that I'm trying to make Black American literature, actually multi-ethnic American literature. I'm trying to keep it thriving and alive. Because the way you keep the literature alive is the same way you keep classical music alive. You put it in the public sphere. Do you honestly think that nobody made a good song since Bach or Beethoven or Strauss or any of those Europeans? Of course, we have so many potentially marvelous composers here. Herbie Hancock's work is extraordinary. But instead of there being venues and radio stations that are promoting American creative arts, we've got them keeping the ancient arts of Europe alive and held up like a standard. You should have a problem with this, because it was that attitude of forcing the cultural dominance of an invading species. It was that mindset that made them hire people at Yale and Harvard that would steal my work and discredit me. My work went forward with Valerie Smith, and she became the president of Swarthmore. She used my work to help herself get there. Hazel Carby from Yale, she became a chairman of a department newly formed. And she did it by stealing and farming out my work. She's where I should have been. But instead, I'm living at this end of the world transient hotel with criminals that physically attack me, that try to break into my room every day. That's not right, you see, and nobody will tell my story. I have broadcast, since 2014, I have contacted every major news agency in America to bring attention to my story. The editors know I'm here. The leaders of broadcasting know I'm here, and they verified my story. I just don't understand why they all just refuse to tell it. And you might say, well, what difference does it make, Silver Rain? Well, it makes plenty of difference. Because when you hear all of the ways that America, government, politicians, and law have violated my human rights, you will be alarmed. You'll want to protect yourself, and don't think they're just doing it for me. I'm just one of the first ones through in the new system of complete oppression and robbery. Because my stepfather, of whom I am an heir, robbed, became a brain surgeon. Do you know how rare that is? South African immigrant Zulu Basotho brain surgeon. Since 1971 or so in Chicago, and then in Bull's Head City, Arizona. Rich, 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 rich. Prestige, prestige, prestige. Well, I grew up when he was, my parents, they married when he started his internship out of medical school. My mother became a judge and a lawyer. She became a lawyer and then an elected circuit court judge in Chicago. Great income, great benefits, lots of prestige. Now, she did that after I was grown, but it still counted in my inheritances, and it still counted in my family. People used to look at the Cosby Show and say, oh, that's so unrealistic. And I said, not when you're me. Not when you're Letha Deck. My birth name. That was Letha Deck's family. Doctors, lawyers. Even my grandmother had a master's degree in guidance counseling and taught high school. Our family worked hard generation after generation after generation. Landowners. My grandmother used to tell me that her family had a surrey, a horse and a surrey. A surrey is a decorated carriage, and that they used to go to church in their surrey, and they used to be the object of envy because they had a surrey because of their wealth. My family has been wealthy as long as I know of. And we do have Europeans that married in, but they married a real American. They didn't marry an immigrant. They married an American. So my family's roots in America, according to my grandfather, Mabry Carl Deck, we met the Mayflower. That's what his grandmothers told him to tell me. So that goes back to at least the 1700s. The people that were alive to tell that message. And we all know that the Mayflower was what? 1492, 1500s? My family's been here for centuries. For centuries we've been here. And we've been here through a lot of the stages of the European invasion. And one thing I've learned through these years, and I really learned it recently, is that the Europeans never stopped invading the Americans, killing us and stealing our land. They never stopped. And now, instead of, murdering me in the street like a Gaza Arab would be murdered by an European, they have other ways to kill people like me through the economic system. If you had told me in 2014, as my mother lay dying, that my brother, former Illinois State Representative Andre Martin Tepedi, Thapedi, was going to be able to completely rob me of my inheritance. 10 years ago, my mother died. 10 years ago, she left me a full quarter share of a multi-million-dollar estate. My stepfather died within the past 10 years and left me a trust fund from a billion-dollar estate. Andre became executor for both of my inheritances. And in 2015, as Andre handed us doctored documents with exhibits missing, he said to me in his lispy voice, "You're getting nothing. You're getting nothing." And do you want to know why? I'll tell you why. My brother Andre stole my inheritance. You see, I'm the only one in my family that actually left home and made my own way. I went to Northwestern, and then I became a computer systems programmer analyst after getting training with Zurich American Insurance Company. So first I go to Northwestern, which was one of the top 10 schools in America when I went. Top 10 schools. And I went there and got my degree in literature. And then I became a computer systems programmer and analyst on mainframes in Chicago. And then I started my own business, Crystal Data Systems, because I'd been through so much European racism at Illinois Bell and First National Bank of Chicago that I had come to the decision, and at Zurich American Insurance Company, that I had come to the decision that the only way I was going to be fairly compensated was if Europeans had nothing to do with my success, except to hire me because I was the best man for the job. I said, if I have to count on Europeans to promote me, it's never going to happen. I have to make my own way by my own reputation. My phone rang off the hook. I always had contracts. After I had my second baby, I had my clients calling me the next day to say, yeah, but we know you just had a baby, but when can you come back to work? We got a job for you. Are you going to be available soon? Because I worked hard. My projects came in under budget and under time. I always exceeded the estimates, and I did a good job, flawless, beautiful work. And then When I became a mother, a stay-at-home mother, I said, hey, you know what? There'll be a job when my children are gone, when my children are grown. I knew from reading child development literature that children's value systems are set by the time they're 6 years old. I said, well, let me be the biggest influence until they're at least 6 years old, when their values are set for life, right? I mean, unless you're a psychopath. Which reminds me of Andre. So let's get back to that. Do you want to know why Andre robbed me? Because I made my own way and I was a big success. I went to Northwestern University. Then I became a computer programmer, the highest paid career in the country. And then I became a stay-at-home mother of beautiful children with excellent manners. People used to say to me, you're the reason I had children, because your children were so beautiful and well-mannered. And then I go to Yale, Ivy League, Yale University. Andre hated me because I could succeed. Andre took over 5 years to get out of Morehouse College for men. Morehouse College, a traditional HBCU. Andre took more than 5 years to get a bachelor's degree. He couldn't get into any law school except John Marshall, which was bought by the University of Illinois, which really raised its prestige because everybody in Chicago knew that you could get a law degree from John Marshall as long as you were willing to pay the tuition. Their admission standards were next to nothing. And Andre got arrested twice for breaking into the school. What was he doing breaking into the school? Stealing tests? Okay? Andre made sure that I did not get I did not get my inheritance, because Andre was always envious of my success. My mother had a picture of me in her office. When you entered her reception area and you walked through to her office door past her library filled with legal books, when you went into my mother's private office, do you want to know the first thing you saw sitting on the table? My high school graduation picture, my face. Because my mother was proud of me. But it's not totally Andre's fault, you see. Andre's father did not want to have children, but he did like making love to my mother. So they had children. And I used to wonder, why doesn't he want children? And then I figured it out. Ike was a psychopath. He didn't care about people's feelings. That's one reason why he was able to become a brain surgeon, dealing with people's pain every day, because it didn't really have a big effect on him. And he caused my mother a lot of distress with cheating and not providing the money that she needed to raise Andre and our youngest brother, Anthony. But what I did pass on to Andre and Anthony was psychopath. They're both psychopaths. Anthony, if you Google Anthony I to Petty, you'll find that he got arrested for aggravated assault. But that's just the time he got arrested. Anthony had to leave FAMU under very strange circumstances. Anthony and Andre both were kicked out of University of Chicago lab school, Montessori school, the JCC, Jewish Community Center program. They both had to go to military school to get an education because of their psychopathy. They could not function in the classroom. They were prone to violence and criminal activities. Both of them. I mean, they disgraced and humiliated my mother so much she didn't even want to show her face. She couldn't believe it, that she had two psychopathic sons that were constantly bringing her disgrace. So when Andre finally, graduates from law school, my mom gets him a job with Eugene Pincham in real estate. Now, real estate law, there's really not much to it. The secretaries type out legal definitions of the land, and a lot of real estate lawyers find great deals in real estate. If a real estate lawyer is a real estate investor, he's really got it made. So one good thing that he was able to do was to really increase my mother's real estate holdings portfolio. They bought up so many units at 6901 Oglesby, where my mother lived. They bought up a lot of those units, and they knew how to make deals. You know how to make deals, like how to let a property go into foreclosure and then buy the tax lease, pay on that for 3 years, and then pay a low payment just to buy it outright. They knew all the tricks for profiting in real estate with dirty deals. So when Andre decided that I was getting none of the inheritance, my mother wrote the trust, and she was a judge and a lawyer. She wrote the trust, and I read it, except for the exhibits that Andre removed from the trust, because we had to ask Andre over and over again to have the family meeting. It wasn't until January that Andre told us all to come to Chicago for the family meeting. And by then, people had pilfered some of my mother's stuff, but my mother died at 83, young, under a misdiagnosis from Johns Hopkins Hospital, because she thought she had the best hospital care. She thought she bought the best insurance, but the Europeans didn't care. They said she had diabetes, because that's what every Indian has. Every Indian, every real American gets diagnosed with diabetes. It's just a trend. My mother had to take insulin shots for over a year before she finally got a right diagnosis from Northwestern University Medical Hospital, which is now called Feinberg. I don't think Andre sued for malpractice, but he should have. I do know that as my mother died, she was actually crying for Andre to come visit her, but he didn't. The legal cases that I got, she put him in business with her when he lost his job with Eugene Pincham. She put him in business with her to petty law firm, and she was a judge. She got him a slam dunk case with the Chicago Housing Authority. A toddler had been crushed by a poorly maintained metal fence. A wrought iron fence fell on a toddler and crushed the baby. And Andre was supposed to work that case because my mother had a lot of other things going on. She was suing the stock brokerages for padding her bills. She was, suing the brokerage houses where she had stocks for padding her bills. That's probably why they asked me to leave Charles Schwab when they found out who my mother had been and how much trouble she made for them. She sued the IRS and won. She had her own interests going on. So she throws this case to Andre, who has no job. He's just in the firm with mom, doesn't have to work. And he messed up the case so bad that the family hired another lawyer and they made the newspapers for incompetence. Andre brought so much disgrace to my mother, so much humiliation and so much disgrace to my mother. But she stood by him because he is her child. Unconditional love is what my mother gave Andre and Tony. And Tony would actually menace her life. When Anthony moved right across the street from our mother, where he had an apartment that could look right into her house, we were all terrorized. We were all really afraid for mom. I remember going over to Anthony's house one day to try to see if he had motives on my mother's life, because I couldn't understand why he, at his age of, 40, no job, never could hold a job, got kicked out of college, couldn't stay in any school, clearly psychopath. I mean, all you have to do is talk to him to realize you're talking to a psychopath. he came out much more clearly identifiable than Andre. Andre could fool you, but Anthony could not fool you. So I wanted to know, why in the heck is he living right across from my mother, where he can look at my mother's window and watch my mother come and go, and he's unemployed? And he was living there with a woman. And I just had the strongest feeling that she was like a court-appointed guardian of some sort, that she was more like his jail guard, that maybe they had made a deal along the way that if you do not put Anthony in prison, we will have him under 24-hour supervision, because he was not allowed to have a driver's license. They took his driver's license away from him. So he was not allowed to have a driver's license because he was that dangerous. But my mother was so politically connected, and my stepfather had so much money, that just like Juan Luis Hernandez in Woodbridge, with the Yale University doctor and professor parents, Anthony was able to get around the legal system. He was able to walk freely. In fact, Andre, when he was threatening Anthony as he was doing the reading of the will, he was threatening Anthony, and he said to Anthony, "You have had unfettered access to this property." Andre said unfettered at least 10 times. And that just confirmed my suspicions that Anthony had been under guard, that they had made a deal that if they could stop him from committing further violent crimes on people, that everything would be all right. But while I'm living in Phoenix, Arizona, still trying to fight for my inheritance with Andre, I see a story come up on the CBS News where a boy's mother had been killed by a hit-and-run driver on the north side of Chicago. And he was living with his grandmother. And that child looked exactly like Anthony. And if you think that a kid that's half American and half Zulu, Basotho, South African is going to look like any other Black person in Chicago, you would be mistaken. Both Andre and, well, Anthony has a very distinctive look. And I wouldn't call it South African. It's just, he doesn't look like everybody else. He looks like he was born, he looks like an immigrant. Andre, not as much. But Anthony looks like an immigrant. He looks Caribbean or African. So when I see this child, he looked exactly like Anthony. And his mother had been killed in a hit and run, and they didn't identify the driver. Well, I happen to know that Anthony had 2 illegitimate children that he knew of, and his trust fund was paying for them. So he didn't want another baby mama in his life. So what do you think happened? Meanwhile, Andre, who is an Illinois state representative, claims to be living in his district and claims to have an office in South Shore. Well, the office that he claims to be working out of to validate his ability to run in that neighborhood is under so many sanctions from the Chicago Zoning Commission that inspects properties for their safety, that nobody could live in it. It was unoccupiable. And it was under sanctions. But because of Andre's political connections and because Chicago runs on crooked politics, he didn't have to fix it up. And even when CBS News reported that they didn't think Andre even lived in the district he represented, he didn't. But the story died. The story just died. Nobody cared. Nobody could do anything about it. Even when Andre sent 25% of the young men to the private prison system in his Grand Crossing district, nobody said a thing about it. You can look at the statistics and see 25% of the men just disappeared into prison. from that community. You could just look at it and see and say, wow, that looks deliberate. That looks like somebody used law enforcement to increase the profits for the private prison industry. You see, a psychopath will do that. Psychopaths don't care about racism. They just want to hurt people. They just want to have power over people. So that's why Andre robbed me. Andre robbed me because I was a permanent admonition, a permanent rejection by my mother of his self. I achieved the things my mother wanted her son to achieve. Me. Now, when my grandmother died, my aunt was able to steal a lot of the inheritances. A lot of the inheritance my aunt stole, and she told my mother that she didn't deserve it. Because my mother was already a lawyer, and my aunt was a teacher. But my grandmother and my aunt expected my mom to do legal work for them for free. They didn't know that when my mother joined the Bar Association, it pretty much prohibited her from working for Americans for money or for free. But she couldn't tell them that. That was their sacred pledge, that they were going to be loyal to the British Accreditation Registry, the Bar Association. And if they were not going to be loyal to the Bar Association, they could not practice law in America, because you had to be admitted to the British Accreditation Registry to be recognized as a person of standing in an American court. You see the way they integrate the systems, so you have no other option but to submit to the European domination and takeover of American lands, property, and liberty. They make it so you have no choice. You can't do anything but submit. So they didn't know that my mother had taken a pledge that prevented her from working for them. But then my mother did something else. She took all of the land under her own name, because she knew my aunt and her children were not really competent. When my Uncle Bill was drafted out of Meharry Medical School into the United States Army to serve in Korea during the Korean War, he was drafted right out of medical school, which was against the law. But not if you're trying to rob the Americans and make sure American doctors don't have lives that are good and ruin their children for generations. You know, there's not a single cousin from that family that has children or made it. There were even suicides among the four of them, because Uncle Bill was sent to Germany during the Korean War. And they all came back messed up in the head. All of them were subjected to German mind control, German experiments. Post-World War II continuation of medical torture of the Jews was what the black soldiers in Germany were subjected to. So my uncle came back addicted to speed, a pedophile, and his children, well, two of them were born in Germany too, and they were unviable. So my mother knew this. She was trying to make sure that the family assets were protected. So she kept the land. My aunt saw that as a great betrayal. My grandmother saw that as a betrayal too. But when my grandmother wrote her last will and testament at my mother's house as she was going to the hospital with a diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and she was coming to my mother, who was married to a doctor, to try to get the best medical treatment that she could. So my aunt took everything. So my mother told me time and time again, she said, you know, that hurt me so much that my sister stole my inheritance. And I feel so mad at Mom that she didn't do a better will or trust. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make sure that my estate is divided equally between all my children, because the pain that I have felt from being disinherited from my mother's estate is not anything I want anybody I love to ever feel. So when my mother died, she made clear in her trust fund that she wanted a complete inventory and evaluation of the value of her assets. She wanted everything counted, everything photographed, everything. And she had the money to pay professional assessors to come in and do it. But Andre refused. Andre just stole everything for himself. He had us come out there in Chicago and created some kind of lottery system where you put, your name on something you want. You get a little sticker, and anything you find in Mom's house that you want to get, you just put your sticker on it. Andre kept all of those boxes of things that I had chosen for myself. When I left with a suitcase or two of some designer clothes and a couple of trinkets, most of which were stolen when I moved to Phoenix by the people that regularly broke into my apartment, even had keys, broke into my apartment to steal my things, just help themselves at La Serena at Toscana on Bell Road in Phoenix, Arizona. Even when I called the police and they got the fingerprints, they didn't arrest the boy, but he did move. But his father didn't move. His father stayed right there. His father reminded me so much of Keanu Reeves, except he was like smaller. He didn't seem like as big as Keanu. But one thing I've discovered is that, movie stars look bigger on the screen when you see them in real life. Once I saw Drew Barrymore, and she's just a little girl. She was like 5 feet tall or something. I couldn't believe it. So this guy looked like Keanu. And I don't know, maybe he invested in Arizona property. I don't know. I just know that his kid got away with stealing. So I don't have. And then when I moved here to this hotel, the people that break in here actually cut the strap on one of the suitcases that I inherited from my mother, a Hartman overnight bag. They cut the strap on it because I had the straps all bound up together where you couldn't pull the suitcases out without pulling all of them out together. So they just cut the strap. So living in this precarious state, in these temporary situations where I don't have security, I don't have protection, I've been robbed. So the few things that I got from my mother, they're not really here. They even stole my piece of jade, a jade medallion that I had. Those 2 cats that equal wealth? Well, I had a medallion, totally jade. And they stole that from Phoenix the week I was leaving. Walked right into my apartment and I was sleeping with it in a little medicine bag. And they just went in there and stole it. I could cry because that's just one of the abuses that have been enacted against me. And if anybody had ever stood up to protect me the first time, these other things would never have happened. I contacted almost every member of the Illinois state legislation to tell them that Andre was stealing the trust fund from me. I contacted them all. I contacted CBS, my friend Dorothy Tucker, a newscaster. I contacted ABC, CBS, CNN, BBC. I told everybody that I was being robbed of a multi-million-dollar trust fund written by a lawyer with me as a successor trustee beneficiary under the executor Andre Martin Tapetti, Illinois state politician. Do you know that when I called every single probate lawyer in Illinois, no matter if they were in Cook County or not, They all refused to represent me. Every single one of them refused to represent me except one, whose name I will not tell because he asked me not to tell his name. But he took $2,000 from me. And a couple of months later, he gave $2,000 back to me and said, I can't work this case. So the lawyers gave up on ever reclaiming my inheritance for me, my multi-million-dollar inheritance. So by the time it got to Isaac dying, I didn't even try to fight with Andre for my share of my stepfather's legacy, inheritance for me. And my stepfather had called me just a few months before he died. He called me and talked to me. And I was outside and it was a FaceTime call. So I had to cut it short. I said, I'm going to call you right back. Would I call him right back? His handlers wouldn't let him talk to me. You see, he died of Alzheimer's. But he called me to say goodbye. He was in Las Vegas at the time. And he FaceTimed me. Because he always asked about me. He always cared about me. We had wonderful conversations. And I didn't know he was a psychopath, but my mother knew. She had been studying psychopathy after she met him. But it took me a long time to put it together because when you're just a naive, regular person, you don't think about things like this. It never occurred to me 10 years ago that my brother, Illinois State Representative Andre Martin Tapetti, my loving brother, would steal my inheritance from me and be one of the reasons why I live in poverty and can't do anything for myself. Just one of the reasons why is him. And do you know that Andre never would have stolen my inheritance if I had gotten my credentials from Yale without making enemies at Harvard and Yale for my political position to keep literature alive? You see, Hazel was British. And she wanted to stop American literature at Langston Hughes 100 years back. She wanted to push the cultural clock 100 years back so that nobody but the rappers were representing American culture, so that nobody would care if we died. Nobody would care if we ceased to exist because our social value was so low. We weren't Mozart. No sirree. We weren't Mozart. We were Snoop Doggy Doggy. We wanted gin and juice. We wanted hoes and twerking. We didn't want art like Romare Bearden produced, James Lawrence produced, and who knows how many other real American artists could have emerged by now. And do you ever think what lives these people deprived of their destiny are living? The torture and the pain of knowing you are not going to be allowed to reach your goal. You're not going to be allowed to live your life purpose because the Europeans don't want you to. They want the whole world to think that your culture stopped growing 100 years ago. Well, I was there in academia, reading everything written by Black Americans. I was there to see that Phyllis Wheatley, an immigrant from Africa, was the first published poet in this nation. Phyllis Wheatley, look her up, because you'll have to look her up if Google has not erased her or said she's a myth or something, because we're dealing with that, as well as all the other lies that have been told. And the Smithsonian Institute gathered up and hoarded so much evidence of reality and made it inaccessible to us all. So when you've got NPR, National Public Radio, PBS, Public Broadcasting System, when you've got them involved in telling American stories and foreign stories that do not represent the reality we're going through, then you've got everybody against you. I contacted network news. I contacted Black-owned media, like the Chicago Defender. And you know what I found out when I tried to get the Chicago Defender to tell my story of how Andre Tapetti was robbing me? They let me know that Ruth Bader Ginsburg's organization was a part of their structure. They let me know that the Jews ran them, that they couldn't tell a story that was not permitted to be told by the Jews in news and the Jews in broadcasting. And just like the Jews want Gaza, the Jews want Oklahoma, Michigan, Illinois, Florida, Nevada, Arizona, places where I've inherited property. They want all that too. And Andre's a psychopath. He didn't even get married until he was almost 50 because he wanted to be a senator. He got married as my mother died. After he heard my mother was dying, he was putting his plan into effect. His plan to become a United States Senator. He's the one that made the proposal in the Illinois legislature that Barack Obama's birthday become a national holiday because he was trying to get attention to be a senator. My uncle Warren G. Gaines told me that. He said, your brother's planning on keeping your inheritance because he wants to be a senator. And I was like, thank you, Uncle Warren G. That was a really big key to why this is happening and what I can expect. So I didn't sit around waiting for my inheritance, right? I did everything in my power. I ran campaigns on Facebook. I wrote a book about Ivy League faculty plagiarism to try to get myself in the public sphere where I could tell my story, where real Americans could hear what's happening and say, whoa, that happened here in America? And then I'd get some public support for the things that are happening here. And they're happening to me because my family is one of the first families to arrive at this level of economic success. It took us generations of building to build ourselves to the point where I would be a billionairess and morally intact, knowing what the right thing to do with power and wealth is. Not just enhance myself, not enable my enemies to acquire more of other people's properties, not to promote genocide, but to work for peace and love and freedom and unity and art. To work for you to help you become your most accomplished self. You can read my Yale graduate school application if you wonder how true these words are that I'm saying to you. You can look at all my social media and see what my value system is. I was here for people. I was here because I'm full of loving and willing to contribute to society in ways that empower people to become their best selves. So if you're working in a society that's trying to promote selfishness and greed and immorality and trying to have enough people willing to commit heinous crimes, genocide, theft of native lands, you want those kind of people. And if you can't get those kind of people, you want to build robots that will violate morality, that will destroy American life. Because by any means necessary, you want your group to be dominant, in power, the elite. So the reason that all this is happening to me, all of these outrageous offenses, is because I'm the first one to get to the finish line, where you cross over from striving to generations deep success. Why, when I get my inheritance, my family will never have to work for a living again. We'll be bigger than the Rockefellers. will be bigger than any of the immigrants that came here and created huge endowments for themselves. That's how big my estate is from the Tepetti family inheritances. But no, they give it to the psychopath. They will not protect me. They will not defend my rights. The lawyers are afraid to stand up. So there were some good things that came out of it. Andre gave up his political aspirations. He decided never to run for senator. And he actually started to try to pass some laws that were of benefit to the people, because I had published so much about the way he had 25% of the men under 21 in his community arrested and in the prison system for life. So just a little bit of browsing that I did in his legislative history after I started making a lot of trouble for him, it looks like he did some good. But along the way, he tried to sue me in 2016. He tried to sue me for what I did on Facebook, but I won the case in federal court. Gary Friedman, I think, was the Jew judge in the federal court that Andre put me through, as he tried to accuse me of slandering him, as I told the truth about his robbing my inheritance. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter. I mean, maybe it would have been better if the case had gone through and the newspapers had picked it up and people would have learned about the theft of my inheritance. But I've met so many people who said, oh, it happens. They're so laissez-faire about it. It happens. Do you want that to be a trend? You work hard your whole life. You scrimp, you save so that your children will have something to build upon, only to find out that the society, from the judges, the lawyers, the state representatives, the federal government, the newspapers, the public broadcasting, they're all working together to make sure that you don't get your stuff, that your children do not get their inheritances. That changes everything, doesn't it? I mean, what kind of financial plans would you make if you knew that there's a whole group of predators waiting to use systems that they are creating and testing on me to deprive your heirs of their legacy? You see how important my story is? And that's just two things. That's just the intellectual property theft being legitimized in the Ivy League and corporations, and the theft of a trust fund by a government official who's also my kin. Those are just two of the things. But don't you know that if Yale had not gotten away with targeting me, I would have had enough power to fight Andre from robbing me? I would have had the greater influence because I'm not a psychopath and I've got credentials from the Ivy League and a computer science business. I would have had alliances. But you're not going to have alliances when all the people in power are no good. You're not going to have alliances when criminality becomes the standard for selecting those with decision-making power. And that is where we are standing. So here I am 10 years later. I published on Facebook till my fingers fell off using nothing but a cell phone. Nothing but a cell phone, because Juan Luis Hernandez and his hacking team had ruined my Apple products. He had so many hackers coming in. As soon as I turned my computer on, all the hackers would come in because he used that computer to hack Target in 2013. But I tell people that, don't you think that's important to know? I know who hacked Target in 2013 and stole all their cash register. I was sitting right across from him. He was using my machine. But ever since then, I couldn't use my machine. So I had to do all of my social media publishing using the iPhone, straining my eyes, typing 16 hours a day, telling the story of what Andre was doing to me, telling the story of what Hazel Carby had done, telling the story about what Henry Louis Gates had done, telling the story of the media ignoring me, telling my real American autobiography. Totally ignored. Then I get on Twitter, right? After the Arizona state troopers kidnapped and tortured me, and Tina Ainley used Arizona Superior Court to deny me a voice and try to get me locked up as a mental patient, well, I started broadcasting on Twitter, right? But even before then, in San Diego, I had been physically attacked and the police did nothing about it. A man gave me a concussion, a man who told me, well, at least you're not a big black man, but I'm still going to get rid of you within 2 years. And within 2 years, there I am, homeless. Don't you think that's an important American story? If you've got people living in senior citizen housing and they've got racists, big 6 foot tall, 315-pound racist Europeans beating them, other neighbors beating them, that's a story. But no, in public broadcasting, in public media, in the news, we get Americans pretending that this is a moral nation, pretending that we're living in a democracy, pretending that human rights mean something. Well, look at me. Look at me. I'm being ignored to death.